one of the things that you kept bringing up that I thought was fascinating was, and maybe it's just the way that I was sort of tend to see the pastoral, this is kind of fun, is as a kind of structural thing, right? So that you're constantly experiencing a sort of disconnect, even in the Theocritus pastoral, between a kind of present moment where you frisk like the nannies, and that's all where you always bring to that moment some kind of awareness of something else, and whether that thing encroaching on it is temporal or geographical or racial or but there's always a form of difference that
always
encroaching.
Yeah.
And the reason why I brought up the Blake is because those are sort of in a sense the purest celebrations of pastoral I can think of, and yet even there it's there. And that's
and if this was a 3-hour-long talk where I could hold you all hostage, I would talk about how interesting it is that in Theocritus, in his Idols, there's this fascinating split between what people call the bucolic poems, although they fight endlessly over what those actually consist of, and then what are called the urban mimes. And in the urban mimes, you're walking down the street, two Greek women, and suddenly you have to, talk about how these rascally Egyptians just drive you crazy. And another thing that I would love to do as part of my Theocritus project is a kind of mapping project, because I've already counted approximately 90 different sort of ethnic, racial, national, religious, not religious actually, but just the multiplicity of identities in Theocritus is fascinating. And what classical scholars have done is just created this separation that's so profound that when they, those poems just aren't discussed at the same time. And then the homoerotic poems too are, maybe he didn't even write those. So it's really interesting how this gets divided.
I think we have a question from there, yeah.
I was wondering a bit just about how you're trying to integrate the question of the people with the question of the land. And one way, just because I read this very recently, but Leo Marx in The Machine in the Garden makes this distinction of pastoralism with a relationship to the land and primitivism as a relationship to the people. And so I'm wondering how, in focusing on the pastoral and at the same time sort of criticizing Locke for absenting the people who are there, how you're trying to bring it sounds like you're sort of interested in bringing the people back in, but does that still fall under the rubric of pastoralism, or is that another genre? I have another question, but since I'll just...
That's a great question.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think they're separate. I mean, actually, I've really fallen under the influence of Rolf Trouillot, who wrote this incredible article called The Savage Slot, where he talks about this sort of 3-part system, and he says that he sort of divides up this sort of form of subjectivity that creates the savage slot, and there's, on the one side, there's utopia, which he associates with the pastoral, and then there's order, and then there's the savage slot. And so, but I find in nearly anything that you could read that might occupy a space like pastoral, that first of all, there's always there are always notions of difference. There's always some sort of way that you can find, there isn't a purity or sort of a separation between kind of the pastoral and then these other ideas. In fact, I think that's that very sort of idea in Leo Marx's book, for instance, it really does leave out race completely. I looked at it and then I just kind of wasn't able to...
Why did Leo Marx leave race out entirely? Because it wasn't going to help his Marxism in the book?
I think most people do. And I'm sort of happy that they do, because then I can notice it, and be really revolutionary, or at least imagine that I am being really revolutionary, because it's sort of, it's fun.
Let's go back to Hegel.
I don't want to, it's not that I'm faulting Locke, again, like I was trying to say in the beginning, I really love Locke. I get a huge kick out of reading it. And there's, I'm fascinated by how strongly he's claimed by liberal Americans as a kind of, democratic thinker.
It's because he was part of our civic lesson when we were in 5th grade.
Which I can't see that at all. But
can we go back to Hegel for a second? In the main part of Africa, history is out of the question. That's a smoking gun quote.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is I taught this last year in freshman seminar, and there was an African woman in the class, and she said, yeah, it's true.
She
said, he's right. But,
So,
well, it's
but
for geographical reasons. That's what, you know, if I,
he says the Mediterranean is the
How-
heart of the world, and
Africa's...
that's history, and Africa's
Right.
out of the
Well, it's
question.
mostly upland, and there's very little, this is, I'm quoting Hegel, it's mostly upland, and there are only little bits along the coast. And then if there's anything that ever did happen that was good in Africa, it was really European anyways. So
How could
Egypt
Hegel
is
have
really
said
European.
something without?
What?
So is Carthage.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Uh,
Yeah,
That's
please.
just so I was coming. My reflection first would be that that woman who said that might be because of her internalized racism or wanting to please someone else. And I thought it was very interesting what you said, one of your many interesting points about the description of how Native Americans used the land let justify genocide. This very arbitrary as far as I'm concerned, the Mediterranean versus Africa. I can't remember his name, but I was just reading an acclaimed African poet who was talking about the lushness of the landscape and how Westerners don't appreciate it and use it to justify racial colonialism. So I could easily substitute Mediterranean and Africa and say, oh, Africa is the heart of the whole world, and
Thank you for that comment, because that's exactly sort of what I'm trying to get at. And, you know, as I move towards hopefully we'll have time for the Lefkowitz stuff, it's, you know, it's, that's kind of the point. The point isn't to say, you know, look, these people came up with these really horrible things. It's partly also just to see how arbitrary these things are, and yet how enduring, but how absurd, like sort of this notion of the pastoral. I've come to see it really as a very almost a kind of dominant aesthetic mode, probably because I'm writing about it.